This is the BioCentury Show.
The BioCentury Show is supported by the BioCentury Conference Series. Join BioCentury on the road to network, partner, and debate with peers across the biopharma innovation ecosystem. Our upcoming events span the globe and feature topics from translation to company building to deal making and investment. Visit biocenturyontheroad.com for more information.
Hello, I'm Steve Usdin, BioCentury's Washington Editor. Happy New Year, and for those who observe it, happy JP Morgan. I'm fortunate today to be joined by Representative Jake Auchincloss. Representative Auchincloss represents the 4th District of Massachusetts. His constituents include many of the women and men who drive American biomedical innovation. Representative Auchincloss has taken a strong interest in issues of critical importance to the life sciences, including PBM reform, investing in the bioeconomy, and more. His recent appointment to the House Energy and Commerce Committee puts him at the center of public policy debates over FDA, NIH, Medicare, and Medicaid. Representative Auchincloss, first, congratulations on your appointment to the Energy and Commerce Committee. As you think of your constituents in the life sciences and more broadly about the U.S. bioeconomy, what are the opportunities to embrace? What are the threats to avoid in the 119th Congress?
Steve, thanks for having me on. I view U.S. policy towards the bioeconomy through 3 lenses, 3 jobs that the federal government should be doing. The first is the federal government as impact investor, which is to say funding the curiosity-driven, peer-reviewed research through the NIH, through the National Science Foundation, through the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, that then creates the body of knowledge that can produce new findings and new cures. The second is the federal government as a smart regulator, providing certainty and evidence-driven assessments so that innovators know over long periods of time the rules of the game so that they can invest with confidence. And then the final one is the federal government as an insurance company. And we should be an insurance company that demands and pays for value. That means rigorous assessments of which interventions are producing societal value, which are not, and reimbursing accordingly. If we can do those 3 jobs well, the United States is a good insurance company, the United States is a smart regulator, the United States is an impact investor, we're going to continue to have world-leading biomedical enterprise.
Well, that's a great framework for our discussion today, and I want to start off with something that actually kind of is overarching over all of it, which is the appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Or the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as HHS Secretary. You've been very outspoken in your criticism of him, so have I. A man who caused a deadly measles outbreak in Samoa, who says HIV doesn't cause AIDS and believes the CIA and pharma companies are conspiring to poison Americans. What could go wrong? What's your take on the nomination, and what do you think are his prospects of getting confirmed?
You're right in those comments, and you were right in your editorial for BioCentury. RFK is a quack and a conspiracist who has no place near the levers of influence with Health and Human Services. I am concerned that he's going to fuse his own personal brand with the organs of state to significantly undermine public confidence in vaccines in particular, as well as potentially in fluoride, both of which we know have been some of the most successful medical interventions of the last century. Vaccines by themselves have saved 146 million lives in the last 50 years. Arguably, no more effective public health intervention, except arguably sanitation and clean water for reducing mortality in children. And the fact that he would have gone to Samoa in 2019, derailed their measles vaccination campaign, resulting in 83 deaths, the majority of them being children, demonstrates that he is not just an ignorant individual, he is a reckless and dangerous one as well. It's not academic. There are 5 states in the United States where measles vaccination rates are hovering at or below herd immunity rates. And with the wrong kind of messaging, you could see those plummet and you could see measles outbreaks, and children will die, and they will die in pain. It is preventable, and no Republican should be voting for him. Unfortunately, they will. no Senate Democrat certainly should be voting for him, and I worry that unfortunately some of them might. And to me, a Democrat who votes for RFK is undermining the party's commitment to science and to children's public health. Now, I am more heartened by the nominations for NIH and FDA. I think McCary and Bhattacharya are scientists who respect evidence and have the esteem of their peers, even though there have been vigorous disagreements in the past. I think those are two safe pair of hands. But when you look at the alignment between the Office of HHS Secretary, which will be filled with anti-vax lawyers, and the CDC, which is going to be helmed by an anti-vax crusader, I'm significantly concerned about undermining this country's ability to produce and then distribute vaccines.
Well, that really is an enormous concern. And you mentioned CDC, of course. That's one of your former colleagues in the House, right, Dave Weldon? He
preceded me, but he has been undermining public confidence in vaccines for 3 decades now.
Let's shift over to something a little bit more positive. You've introduced a bipartisan PBM reform bill. What are you trying to do with it, and what do you think are the chances of it getting enacted, given that it was pulled from a must-pass bill in the final days of the last Congress?
Devastatingly disappointing that Speaker Johnson at the last minute blinked. This PBM reform bill, not the one that I had co-authored, but one that had passed the House on a bipartisan basis and included Part D delinking, as well as a ban on Medicaid spread pricing and requirement for mandatory NADAC reporting, 3 elements that would significantly have improved the pharmaceutical supply chain alongside auditing and transparency requirements that would, I think, have created a more efficient marketplace overall. These would have saved $5 billion for taxpayers while lowering copays and rationalizing the pharmaceutical market. And the health insurance lobby, of course, hated it because it was a profit center for them. And Speaker Johnson folded at the last minute, took that bill out. Now, I think when you look at the 119th, I see cause for optimism that we'll get this across the finish line. The major players involved in that legislation on the 118th are still there. They're still influential. They still want to get it done. I'd like to see us go further. My own bill, Pharmacists Fight Back, has 60 bipartisan co-sponsors, and it takes the next step in, it's probably the most muscular PBM reform ever introduced at the federal level. And the goal here is to beat back the middlemen of drug pricing. They are rent-seeking and taking about $300 billion out of the US healthcare system through the gross to net bubble every single year, and they're creating no value. And this is the thing I really try to impart to my constituents is there are some elements of the pharmaceutical supply chain who are doing R&D. There are some elements who are talking to patients and prescribing drugs. And then in the middle, you got these people who are shifting paper around and somehow charging exorbitant rates that are inflating the cost of drugs for everybody else. It needs to end.
So how would you pierce the gross to net bubble? How does your legislation go about doing that?
It's important to state first and foremost that we're already making progress in piercing the gross to net bubble in that, and the changes to the Part D benefit program in the IRA have started to do that with the Medicaid rebate changes alongside the change to the catastrophic phase of Part D. You're starting to see that gross to net bubble collapse. I think the fiduciary standard in the 2021 Consolidated Appropriations Act is leading to litigation that is causing more flat rate PBMs to compete against the rent-seeking PBMs. That's going to lead to, I think, some deflation in the gross to net bubble. So some of the trends that we're seeing there are already moving along. But the core of it, Steve, is getting rid of rebates. That we are going to demand, we need to demand that PBMs be paid a flat rate as opposed to getting more money the higher the price goes. You don't have to be an economist to understand that if you are inducing PBMs to seek out higher list prices in order to get higher rebates, you're going to have an inflationary situation. And pharmaceutical manufacturers only get about 50% of the revenues from brand medications. The other 50% are going to those in the middle, like the PBMs and occasionally the hospitals under 340B. My bill does a whole host of things. It also takes on steering and spread pricing. But at the core of it, it is about trying to turn that rent-seeking middleman into a flat-rate service and technology provider.
So I mentioned that you've been appointed to the Energy and Commerce Committee, but when we first met, it was because you're on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Select Committee introduced the BioSecure Act, which barred or sought to bar federal contracts with Chinese biotech companies. You initially supported the bill, then you voted against it. Of course, ultimately it wasn't passed. Briefly, why did you oppose it in the end? And I think much more importantly, what do you think should and will be done in the 119th Congress with regard to China and biotech?
Well, first, as a point of clarification, it was two different bills. So there was one bill that was introduced under the House Select Committee on China. That bill never went anywhere. And then a different bill, which I opposed, was introduced under the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. That bill was flawed in its conception and flawed in its drafting. Two core reasons. One, it's a bill of attainder, meaning that it lists specific companies with no due process for how they get on or off that blacklist. That's unconstitutional. You've got to have a process in place by which you evaluate individuals or corporations for behavior, and then they can get on or off that list. Number two is it would, if enacted, deprive veterans and active duty members of innovative new treatments because it prohibits TRICARE or the Veterans Affairs Department from procuring medicines from biotechs that research those medicines in contract with a CRO like WuXi. It does not prohibit Medicare, Medicaid, or ERISA plans from buying those medicines. Well, as many of our listeners will intuit, that's 95% of revenues that are still on the table for most biotechs. They're very likely still going to use those foreign CROs, and everybody will still be able to buy the medicines except for active duty military and veterans members. And there's no waiver process for this. They can only get one 18-month extension, but after that, no waiver is permitted, meaning that veterans and active duty members could permanently be deprived of new medications a decade from now. That is just terrible policy. Thankfully, after I raised this with Veterans Affairs repeatedly, the department issued technical guidance back to Congress that said this is a real problem with the bill. And a number of veterans and I led a letter to House leadership explaining why this was such a bad idea. Next Congress, I hope this bill never sees the light of day. It needs to be drafted from first principles. And I think we have to understand that there are elements of biomedical R&D that are areas of opportunity and areas of threat and risk in the US-China relationship. Let me briefly outline what I think we should do with that relationship going forward. One is we need a treaty between the United States and China that marks that biology will be a defense-only domain. There are currently 5 domains of competition that are widely accepted: air, sea, space, land, and cyberspace. They're all offense-defense. It's widely accepted that nations will do both. Biology is the 6th domain. It needs to be the standard, and the United States and China should lead on this, that it is defense only. There is no legitimate offensive applications of vectors in biology. With that kind of a treaty in place, I think there could be areas of healthy competition between the United States and China. We know that they're building a broad clinical trial infrastructure. We know that they're doing pretty good phase 1 research. We know that they are expanding their commercial health insurance, which would lead to a greater addressable market for new medical and biotechnology inventions. This can be synergistic. Biopharma is a high fixed cost, low marginal cost industry. So to the extent that we can lower those fixed costs with better clinical trial infrastructure and expand the addressable market so that those marginal revenues can cover the fixed costs, it's a win-win. And I'd like to see that relationship actually start to work as a complementary one, not as one where we are hunkered down behind respective walls. I want to compete over who cures cancer first. That's healthy competition, but it has to start with more trust that biology will be defense only.
And do you have any ideas or thoughts about whether and how the United States should try to bolster its own biomanufacturing, whether it should try to take on some of the tasks that biotechs and pharmas have become dependent on China for?
I'm skeptical of industrial policy for biomanufacturing. I've seen the proposals, and it's unclear to me that we would be intervening at the federal level in a way that would actually be efficient use of taxpayer dollars. The biopharma industry, I think, has the resources to invest in its own productive capacity, so long as it has the right long-term incentives and a stable regulatory environment. If we can provide those clear rules of the road, and if they are confident that we'll be reimbursing for value, I think then that we can say, hey, and we'd prefer that you do this either domestically or friend-shored, and here's the long-term rules for that. And they'll make their own investments to build out that capacity. I'm not sure I'm on board with strings attached taxpayer giveaways to the industry on the biomanufacturing front. Thoughtful policymakers want to come forward with ideas. I could be convinced otherwise, but right now what we need is clear reimbursement for value and clear long-term rules of the road.
Well, let's talk about that more, and also about everybody's favorite topic, the IRA, right when we come back. We got to take a quick break.
For 3 decades, BioCentury has helped biopharma executives and investors make business-critical decisions and build larger networks with peers across the biopharma innovation ecosystem. Our goals are simple: gather the right people in the room to partner, network, and debate critical issues facing the biotech industry. BioCentury's upcoming events span the globe and feature topics from translation to company building to deal-making and investment. We hope to see you on the road at an upcoming BioCentury event. Visit biocenturyontheroad.com for more information and to register.
I'm back with Representative Jake Auchincloss. Representative Auchincloss, you've mentioned a couple of times now this idea that the United States needs to pay for value. Do you have ideas about how value should be determined, how it should be assessed, and what steps CMS, presumably you're talking about, should take to ensure that that it is paying for value and it isn't paying for things that aren't valuable?
I'd like to see generalized cost effectiveness analysis become the norm for how we assess value. And GCEA is in contrast to the more typical cost effectiveness analysis, particularly that used by NICE in Great Britain or ICER here in Massachusetts. I think generalized cost effectiveness analysis does a better job of looking at the full spectrum of value that novel biomedical or medical device interventions can create. So, for example, reduced hospital bed days, caregiver burden reduction, optionality, that if you give one treatment, another might become possible. Genericization, this is a big one that is missed, is that, yes, drugs start off at the brand level as needing to return the investor's equity stake, but then when they go generic, it becomes a cost-plus model. Hospitals do not go generic. And hospitals are accounting for 60 to 70% of healthcare inflation, whereas branded drugs account for probably 8 to 10% of premium dollars overall, and not going up in a meaningful way. So by using generalized cost effectiveness analysis, I think we have a holistic, long-term picture of what's creating value in the health space and what is really ongoing cost center in the health space. CMS taking the lead on that, I think, would be a major first mover that would, I think, draw a lot of the rest of the industry into there.
I think I can say with complete confidence that you're the only member of Congress who knows what GCEA is and who could describe it. And I'm sure actually some of our viewers, even though BioCentury has written extensively about it, probably some of our viewers don't know what it is either. So you definitely win the prize for that. And I think you're right. How do you go about educating members of Congress? How do you go about bringing that kind of an issue up to CMS?
So CMS, as you know, is really statutorily prohibited from doing those kinds of cost-effectiveness analysis in-house. My prediction, and I would say this is a loosely held prediction, is that over the coming years, as the pace of biomedical innovation continues to pick up, and as we have more of these drugs like GLP-1s that become kind of consumer phenomenon, you're going to see CMS relying ever more heavily on health technology assessments, third-party HTAs. There's a big opportunity, I think, for more HTAs to pop up. I've seen, for example, the Peterson Institute has launched a digital HTA and put significant resources behind it, assessing the quality and efficacy of new digital health interventions. I think there's room for doing more of that on the biomedical space, because we haven't seen, for example, the last Alzheimer's drug, right? Hopefully not. When the next Alzheimer's drug comes out, let's say it is a preventative drug for a certain subset of the population, that is going to consume a lot of cycles in Washington, D.C., because there's going to be a lot of pressure to reimburse for it right off the bat. There's going to be big questions about at what age people should start taking it, et cetera, et cetera. We're really going to need to have evidence-driven assessments of, is this creating value? And if it is creating value, how do we reimburse for it in a way that Medicare can actually capture that value? Because maybe people need to start taking it at the age of 40, not the age of 65 when they become Medicare eligible. So I'd like to see the role of HTAs expand. And then I think with members of Congress, look, I don't think it's any secret. There's a lot of skepticism of pharma, particularly on my side of the aisle, but it's actually increasing on the Republican side of the aisle as well. I always note to members of industry who say that the Democratic Party is very hostile to biopharma innovation. I will note that Donald Trump's preferred and his only consistent biopharma policy of international reference pricing is actually a much stricter form of price controls than anything Democrats ever put forward. He's importing, I think, some of the most strenuous price controls from other countries. So the Republicans are I think, pursuing some very, very hostile policies for biomedical innovation. I think what we have to do is, one, be more articulate about the fact that the pharmacy benefit managers are really the ones that are distorting the pharmaceutical supply chain and bear the lion's share of guilt for high list prices. Two, looking overall at the whole share of healthcare spending and pointing out that 8 to 10%, like I said, is going to branded medications, hospitals accounting for 30 to 40% and inflating at a much higher clip. So overall, you're treating illnesses with either wages or molecules, right? The wages of healthcare providers are the molecules of new drugs. And it's actually a much better bargain to treat them with molecules than with wages. I think we got to make that case compellingly. And then finally, celebrate the quest of science. I think this gets bogged down sometimes in talk about reimbursement policy and regulation. Fundamentally, when you talk to scientists at these research facilities, either industry or basic research at universities, they're really filled with joy and curiosity, and that's infectious.
Well, I think you're right. Also, I think that one of the things that I've written a lot about and think about is just how the ambition of the industry has increased over the years, over the last 30 years. Biotech started out just as trying to replace natural insulin, for example, or something like that. Right. And now, there are CAR T therapies that are curing cancer. There are anti-obesity drugs that are dealing with one of the biggest health scourges of the modern era. Shifting over, though, you talked about Democrats, you talked about Republicans, the IRA, right? And the IRA's drug pricing provisions. You voted for the IRA. Any thoughts about modifying its drug pricing provisions in the current Congress?
Healthcare is complicated, and all healthcare policy, I think, is deserving of being reviewed, revised over the years as you get real-world feedback. So we know that Part D plans are going up in price, and there's less competition for it, rather there's fewer choices in some areas. We need to examine why that is. Now, I'm not here to say that this stabilization program where you fork over $7 billion to the plans because they threatened to raise Part D premiums is acceptable. I'm deeply skeptical that handing over taxpayer dollars to health insurance companies because they threaten to raise premiums is the right approach. I think we should be much tougher with the health insurance companies and basically look at Part C where they're doing very well and say our coding intensity adjustments and the way that we're going to look at your risk populations and the way that we're going to do the STAR system we are going to be brutal if you continue to degrade the quality of your Part D plans in this way. So the federal government has more leverage than sometimes we give ourselves credit for, I think, using Part C. In terms of the 9 to 13 issue, I think I'll start with the basic premise, which is we know that prior to the IRA, most drugs had, on average, about 14 years on market with exclusivity. And so for large molecule, it's gone down to 13. For small molecule, it's gone down to 9. There's an argument about the elasticity of R&D relative to those time on market. Some academics are saying the elasticity is minimal, and in fact, the amount of R&D is about the same. R&D is more about which drugs are coming off pipeline, which drugs are coming off brand and which are not for any individual company. I would just say that we have to look at the actual real world effects within these industries. Are we seeing drug R&D being diverted, particularly from small molecule indications towards large molecule, or just discontinued entirely? Because we don't want to see that. We don't want to stop new cures in their tracks. And as a policymaker, all else equal, if you told me, hey, you can have a new cure, but you have to choose between whether it's going to be BLA covered or NDA covered, every day of the week, I'm going to prefer small molecule. That goes.
Of course, that's the perverse thing to me about the whole thing. Is if you're disincentivizing small molecules, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for patients, it's bad for everybody. So
it's bad for equity. And I would just make this point, and this is particularly resonant on my side of the aisle. If you're serious about health equity, there is nothing more equitable in healthcare than a small molecule drug that goes generic, because it becomes available to everybody for pennies. And that is a profound, I think, goal that we need to persist with the IRA. Now, there's also the orphan drug stuff. I don't love the way that the fix to the IRA fix to orphan drugs has been drafted. I think it's too much of a giveaway to the rare disease. But I can see a world where, regardless of the number of indications that a drug has, once it surpasses 200,000 total patient population, the clock starts ticking on negotiation. That could be a bipartisan deal.
Well, that's an interesting idea. So you're saying rather than saying you're limited to a single orphan designation, you're saying you can have as many orphan designations as you want, but when they stack up and you've got more than 200,000, you're saying more than 200,000 people taking the drug, or more than 200,000 people who would be indicated for the drug, then you would lose the exemption.
Indicated, then you would lose the exemption. That is one approach. Because I think the current drafting of the bill that fixes that, I think that's creating a whole new set of perverse incentives. What we really don't want, of course, and Steve, you know this well, is we really do not want companies delaying the launch of drugs that have a small indication until they are approved for a large indication. Because what that means is that those patients suffering from those rare indications are being denied that treatment for years on end. That, to me, is a very upsetting potential side effect of this legislation, and we do need to prevent that from happening. We want, when a cure is approved, we want that thing launched.
And so you're saying you're amenable to some kind of change on the orphan side. It's just a question of talking about what it is. On the so-called pill penalty, 9 to 13, if you were presented with solid evidence, and if your colleagues are presented with solid evidence that actually demonstrates that it's having an impact, a negative impact on the direction of investments in biopharmaceuticals, do you think that there would be a path to changing it?
I think there could be a path. I think that we got to remember that the cycle time for federal healthcare policy is years, right? And so digesting the feedback is going to take some time. And it likely would need to be paired with other reforms. The ideal that we want is, we want time on market where innovators are rewarded for biomedical innovation, and then we want that price to collapse, go off a cliff right after it loses its brand. And so if you're, to the extent that there are antics that are trying to extend monopoly-based pricing for longer than market exclusivity would allow, that undermines the case to fix 9 to 13. So it is going to be a narrow path, but it is a possible path.
So basically, you're saying there's what people have called a social contract has to be, the industry has to comply with its end of the bargain, and if it does, then you're saying that there's a path for Congress to come in and try to fix things if there are problems that are that have arisen as a result of the IRA.
The biotech social contract. That's right.
Yeah. So another, you've mentioned it earlier in the show. Another big priority for the biopharma industry, the 340B program, right? It started out as a tightly focused program that was really helping, or intended to help, the poorest Americans gain access to medicines that are administered in hospitals. Arguably, it's grown into something that's completely different. It's enormously expensive, and many people say it's just a boondoggle that's helping pad the profits of hospitals and isn't helping patients. one, what do you think about that? And two, is there any realistic possibility that Congress is going to do anything about it in the 119th Congress?
So first, I'm not sure it's arguable. I think it's definite that the program has ballooned into something that would be unrecognizable to the drafters of that bill. I think in the last 10 years, don't quote me on these numbers, it's gone from like $5 to $7 billion to something like $65 billion. I mean, it's astronomical inflation of the program, and there's very limited accountability. But to the extent that we do have insight into the program, what we know is it's bifurcated. The program has really become two distinct programs. One program has been going to the federally qualified community health centers in the way that it was intended, where they are able to, as the bill said, stretch scarce federal resources to provide better care. Now, you can argue that maybe they need to be doing a better job of attaching the discount to the patient at the pharmacy counter and providing some of that transparency. And this is going to come to a head with the maximum fair price competing against the 340B discount and deconflicting those two prices. And that's all going to get very complicated. That element of the program, though, strikes me as, it's technically complicated. There needs to be more transparency. Maybe you got to do a better job of pushing those discounts to the patient. But fundamentally, we want that thing to work. That is why this program was devised, is to support our community health centers. The other part of the program is basically become a way for hospitals to try to create a new revenue center for themselves. And this is the much bigger portion of the program, probably two or three times as big as the FQHC element of the program. And nobody intended this. And this is the really challenging part, is everybody loves their hospital, right? I mean, hospital.
Every member of Congress has got a hospital in their district, right?
Everybody's got a hospital.
On the door.
Everybody loves hospitals. I grew up in a family of people who work in hospitals, and hospitals take care of sick people, and they employ a lot of people. And of course, we want our hospitals to succeed. But to me, it's always struck me, it's like when the airlines come and talk to me about credit cards. People may know this or may not know this, but airlines don't actually make a profit flying airplanes. Airlines make a profit. Their actual profit margin is selling credit cards. And they come to me and they talk about credit cards. I'm like, guys, do you not see the issue with vesting your industry's success on the core competency of a different industry? Like, get out of the credit card business. I mean, fly airplanes, do it safely, do it high quality, make money doing that. And I have the same concern with the hospitals. It's like, if you are surviving based on, candidly laundering high drug prices and soaking high drug prices, that is not a sustainable business model for you as a hospital. You got to focus on the hospital as a creator of societal value, which it is, whether it is a community hospital or whether it is a high-tier academic research facility. It creates a ton of societal value, and make that case, state and federal, about why you need direct federal support. But this big cycle of taking high drug prices and soaking them to pad hospital margins is not sustainable, and it's not good for either of the industries.
Okay, so you've convinced me, and you probably convinced the people who are watching this. I'm skeptical that you're going to convince your colleagues to do anything about this in this Congress. Am I wrong?
I would be surprised if there were comprehensive 340B legislation in this Congress. You look at Senator Thune, for example, the Senate Majority Leader, traditionally a very strong proponent of the status quo in 340B. Maybe he's moving off that, maybe he's not, I don't know. The policy does not seem ripe to me. It sort of feels like where PBMs were a few terms ago. And I would also note that to a large extent, and people will debate this, the center of action is probably in the courts rather than in Congress. There are a lot of experts who argue that the statute as written, actually, if a court will just interpret it as written, a lot of reforms must happen even without rewriting the statute. And I think we'll all be watching some of these court cases very closely over the next 12 months.
Well, thank you, Representative Auchincloss. We've exceeded the time that we had. I have a million other things I want to ask you about, but I want to give you just a chance for kind of parting comments, and good luck on the Energy and Commerce Committee.
I appreciate that, Steve. I'm looking forward to serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's got jurisdiction over a whole host of issues that I'm passionate about. And at the end of the day, my guiding North Star is I believe in science, I believe in biomedical research, and I want the biopharmaceutical industry, I want the companies therein to rise or fall based on the quality of the science that they are doing, held to a very high standard. And I don't want it to be about the quality of your lawyers and lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And so my goal as a policymaker is let's create a system whereby those doing the best science, delivering the best cures are rewarded. Those who are not going to be successful. And let's not make this an industry where it's all about who can game the system better. And that has been that's my core goal, is to rationalize this and make this a place where biomedical innovators can succeed.
Well, thank you. Thank you again.
The BioCentury Show is supported by the BioCentury Conference Series. Join BioCentury on the road to network, partner, and debate with peers across the biopharma innovation ecosystem. Our upcoming events span the globe and feature topics from translation to company building to deal making and investment. Visit biocenturyontheroad.com for more information.